The evening Emily brought up the party, there was a glow about her, though not the warm, cozy kind I was used to seeing when we'd share quiet evenings at home or laugh over a bottle of inexpensive wine in our tiny first apartment. No, this was different. It was vibrant, charged, almost too bright. She spoke quickly, words spilling out in a rush as she described how this would be the event of the season. She couldn't wait to introduce me to her colleagues, she said, her excitement buzzing. But what lingered with me wasn't her enthusiasm, it was the way she avoided meeting my eyes. It felt rehearsed, like she was reciting lines from a play she didn't fully believe in. She mentioned the navy suit, acting as if it were just a casual suggestion, though it was clear she had already chosen it for me. It's going to be really formal, she added breezily. And make sure you're on your best game. These folks are major players. I nodded and smiled, but something about the way she phrased it left a sting. It was that tone she had started using lately, one that made me feel more like a polished accessory than a partner. The venue was sleek and modern, located somewhere in the heart of downtown. Glass walls, soft lighting, and bartenders who mixed drinks like they were crafting spells set the tone for the night. Emily moved through the space effortlessly, her laughter rising above the low hum of conversation, magnetic in a way that drew people in like moths to a flame. She seemed to shine under the dim lights, surrounded by admirers. I stayed close, offering polite smiles and shaking hands with strangers whose names disappeared from my memory the moment they were spoken, all the while keeping Emily in my peripheral vision. It was during one of those brief moments when we were apart that I noticed him. A tall man stood by the bar, his features sharp, his presence commanding. He wore an expensive watch, likely worth more than the car I drove, and his eyes were fixed on Emily. She was across the room, laughing again, and I could tell by how intently he watched her that this wasn't a casual glance. He'd done this before. I tried convincing myself I was overanalyzing, that this was all harmless, but then their eyes met. She smiled, not the professional smile she often used, but a gentler, more personal one. It was the kind of smile shared between people who had history, or at least a connection. I turned away, gripping my drink tighter than necessary, repeating to myself that this was simply a networking event, something she'd been eagerly anticipating for weeks. But the discomfort didn't leave. Emily drifted away soon after, moving effortlessly between clusters of guests, her hand brushing mine briefly before she disappeared again. I attempted to blend in, to play the role of the supportive spouse, but my attention constantly circled back to that man, and the unsettling realization that Emily had vanished from sight. When she returned, she was slightly flushed, her cheeks pink, and her tone a touch too cheerful. "Sorry," she said, laughing a little too loudly. "Got pulled into some long chat about, who knows, work stuff." She dismissed it casually, offering no names, and I didn't press. I didn't want to become the paranoid husband, but deep down, something shifted between us that night. A change I couldn't yet explain, only feel. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, humming softly while she made breakfast, a rare event these days. The comforting smell of coffee and sizzling bacon filled the room, and for a moment, I let myself hope everything was fine. Maybe I had simply read too much into it. But then I saw her phone on the counter, face down, vibrating rapidly. It buzzed 3 times in quick succession. I glanced without thinking, catching a glimpse of the contact name just before she snatched it up like someone protecting something fragile. "Work call," she said quickly. "That's early for a Saturday," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, searching her expression for clues. She shrugged with an easy smile. "Just follow-ups from last night. You know how it is." But did I? I didn't respond. Instead, I watched as she tucked the phone into her back pocket and turned her attention back to the stove. Her shoulders were more tense now, and the humming had stopped. Only the rhythmic scraping of the spatula remained, a sound that felt heavier than it should have. From that point on, things slowly began to change. Emily started keeping her phone on her at all times, tilting the screen away if I happened to glance in its direction. Her evening walks became routine, always with the phone pressed to her ear, her voice low as she talked about deadlines and team coordination. Then came the gym habit. What used to be a twice-a-week routine morphed into 5 days, and she brought home new workout clothes, some still with price tags attached when I found them in the laundry. I teased her once, joking that she was becoming a fitness fanatic. She laughed, brushing it off with, "I just want to feel good in my own skin again." I wanted to believe her. Truly, I did. But the inconsistencies kept piling up. One evening, she told me she'd be working late, something about a team-building dinner. I had the idea to surprise her, hoping to bring a little spontaneity back into our lives. I picked up her favorite Thai food from that little place she loved and made my way to her office building, imagining how her face would light up when she saw me waiting with her favorite pad CEW. However, when I got there, the receptionist gave me a puzzled look. Team dinner? I'm not sure anyone's still around, sir. The office usually shuts down by 6 on Fridays. I stood motionless for a second, looking around the quiet lobby. The takeout bag I had brought began to feel heavier in my grip. That night, I didn't question her. Instead, I observed and waited. A few days later, I noticed a charge on our shared credit card, $112 spent at a downtown restaurant. It was one of those upscale spots where a single dish could cost as much as an entire week's groceries. During breakfast, I casually brought it up. She didn't flinch. "Oh, that's from the dinner with my team," she said smoothly. "We decided to split the bill evenly, even though I barely ate anything. Annoying, right?" I nodded slowly, chewing my food, though my thoughts were spinning. She sounded confident and believable, but deep down, I knew she was not being honest. That night, long after she had drifted into sleep beside me, her breathing calm and even, I lay awake. My mind churned through every tiny inconsistency, each suspicious glance, all the justifications that didn't quite make sense. The suspicion was no longer a quiet doubt. It had become a loud, persistent roar. Something was off, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. The moment everything shifted came sooner than I had anticipated. It was a Tuesday evening, and I had stayed at the office late, finishing a project. Emily had texted earlier to say she was going to a yoga class with Kara and might grab a smoothie afterward. I should have just gone home, but something kept pulling at me, a nagging sensation I couldn't ignore. Instead, I drove to the gym she mentioned. When I pulled into the lot, it was mostly deserted, just a few cars scattered beneath the faint streetlights. I parked far enough to avoid being seen and waited, my heart pounding. If I was just imagining things, I'd accept it, head home, and chalk it up to foolish paranoia. But then I saw her. Emily exited the gym, but she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was the same man from the party, the one with the chiseled features and luxury watch. They didn't touch, but their closeness, the ease of their body language, made my stomach turn. She laughed at something he said, tilting her head in that familiar way she used to only do with me. They stopped near his car, a sleek, black SUV that looked brand new. She leaned casually against the passenger side while he reached into his pocket and handed her something. She dropped it into her bag without pause. It could have been anything, a key, a receipt, but the way she looked at him afterward, her smile too intimate for the setting, suggested it was far from innocent. I remained hidden, my hands locked around the steering wheel until my knuckles lost their color. I wanted to confront them right then and there, to demand answers. But I didn't. Not out of fear, but out of a deep, simmering anger that waited for the right moment to strike. When they eventually went their separate ways, she got into her car and left. I trailed behind at a careful distance. Instead of heading home, she drove to a small cafe tucked away on the edge of town. I parked a few spots down and watched as she entered and sat at a corner table. A few minutes later, the man followed. He didn't sit across from her, he sat beside her. Their shoulders touched, the closeness undeniable. That was the breaking point. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos through the window. They were a bit blurry and grainy, but clear enough to show the truth I had been dreading. She hadn't been honest about where she was, who she was with, or what she was doing. Her behavior didn't resemble that of someone who had committed to a marriage. That night, I didn't bring it up. I returned home, my mind flooded with noise and disbelief. She came in about an hour later, breezing through the front door like nothing had happened. "Yoga was great. Kara says hi," she said casually. I couldn't respond. I was afraid my voice would reveal the chaos inside me. I had reached my limit. No more excuses, no more second-guessing. I needed the truth. And if Emily wasn't ready to tell it, I'd dig it up myself. The following morning, she was already downstairs when I walked into the kitchen. She stood at the counter, sipping her coffee and scrolling on her phone, looking completely at ease. When she saw me, she smiled brightly, the kind of smile that once felt like sunshine but now seemed practiced and hollow. "Morning. I'm catching up with Kara again tonight for a quick drink, so don't wait up," she said. I studied her expression carefully, hoping to catch even the slightest crack in her facade. But there was nothing, just that same effortless charm, like she had nothing to hide. "Sure," I replied, keeping my voice calm despite the turmoil inside. That day at work, I was a mess. No matter how many emails I answered or meetings I attended, I couldn't shake the images from the night before. I had saved the photos in a hidden album on my phone, They haunted me, a constant reminder of the truth I could no longer ignore. I had replayed that moment over and over in my mind, perhaps 100 times or more. Her expression, the subtle way she leaned toward him, the silent bond they shared, it all haunted me. By the time noon rolled around, I had reached a breaking point. I couldn't continue pretending everything was fine while my marriage crumbled around me. If Emily thought she could keep up her act without consequences, she was in for a rude awakening. I began with something small. During lunch, I logged into our shared bank account and reviewed our credit card activity, scrutinizing every charge like a detective on a case. There it was again, that suspicious charge for an expensive dinner at a fancy downtown restaurant. Another was labeled as a conference expense at a boutique hotel 2 towns away. And then one more stood out, an indulgent visit to a spa I knew I'd never stepped foot in. My chest tightened as the pattern became impossible to ignore. But suspicion wasn't enough. I needed solid evidence. That same evening, I left work early and headed to the bar Emily often mentioned. It was a polished, intimate spot she liked to visit with her friends, low lighting, handcrafted cocktails, and a trendy playlist humming in the background. I settled at the far end of the bar, choosing a seat that gave me a good view of the entrance while still allowing me to blend into the background. And just as I'd feared, she arrived about an hour later, but not with Kara. She came in with him. They slid into a booth tucked near the back, where shadows offered them some privacy. I watched intently as he leaned over and gently brushed her hand with his. She didn't recoil, instead, she leaned in closer, her face glowing with the same look she once reserved for me. My hand shook as I raised my phone and snapped photo after photo. This wasn't a work meeting. This wasn't some innocent hangout. It was betrayal in its clearest form. I stayed there for nearly an hour, quietly observing as they laughed, flirted, and shared a plate of appetizers like two people completely absorbed in each other's company. When they eventually got up and left together, I didn't follow. I couldn't. My chest felt hollow, and I could hardly breathe. As I drove home, my mind was filled with images of them, her radiant smile, his hand resting on hers, the way she leaned into him like he was her safe harbor now. When I finally walked through the front door, I was trembling with fury. Emily was already there, lounging casually on the couch in her sweatpants, as if she hadn't just spent the evening wrapped around another man. She greeted me with a cheerful tone, saying, "You're home early. How was your day?" For a second, I just stared at her, stunned by how effortlessly she played the part of the loving wife. It was as if she had mastered the art of deception. "It was fine," I replied stiffly, heading toward the kitchen to avoid her gaze. "How about you?" "Oh, it was great. Kara and I had such a good time, like always. She's hilarious. You'd really like her if you spent some time with us," she said, her voice light and unbothered. Every word she spoke now felt like a blade, each one cutting deeper. But I didn't let it show. I kept my composure, waiting for the right moment. This wasn't the time to expose her. I wanted her to believe she had the upper hand. Because when the truth surfaced, I wanted it to hit her just as hard as her betrayal had hit me. That night, while Emily slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. A storm of emotions churned inside: fury, heartbreak, and a relentless determination to take back control. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not without irrefutable proof, not without making sure she couldn't escape with another smooth lie. So, I resolved to set a trap. The next morning, I played my part to perfection. Over breakfast, I acted as if everything was completely normal, maybe even a bit warmer than usual. Emily seemed completely unaware, scrolling through her phone while mentioning plans for another girls' night later that week. "That sounds like a good time," I said casually, sipping my coffee. "You and Kara have been hanging out a lot. When do I finally get to meet this mysterious friend of yours?" There was a slight pause, just a flicker in her expression before she laughed it off. "You know how it is, girl stuff, lots of gossip. I promise, you'll meet her soon, maybe at the next party." Her response was smooth and practiced, a perfect dodge. I didn't press her. I simply smiled and nodded, letting her think the lie had worked. Later that afternoon, I took an extended lunch and visited a private investigator I had found online. His office was tucked into a quiet strip mall, nothing flashy. The man who greeted me, Frank, carried himself with the sharp efficiency of someone who had dealt with more than his fair share of messy situations. "So, what exactly do you need me to dig up?" he asked after glancing over the notes I'd brought. I laid it all out for him, the questionable excuses, the strange behaviors, and the man I had seen with her. Frank didn't show any surprise. He just nodded and took notes in a small, well-worn notebook. "All right," he said when I finished. "Give me about a week. Maybe less." When I handed him the deposit, it felt like sealing my fate. I had no idea what he'd uncover, but deep down, I knew it was going to turn everything upside down. Still, I couldn't just wait around passively. I needed Emily to believe I was still clueless, still the same trusting husband she had been deceiving for months. That evening, I proposed a date night, something we hadn't done in ages, considering how often she claimed to be too busy. She hesitated briefly but then agreed, her voice light and casual. "Just promise me this won't be one of those dull dinners," she joked lightly. "Let's make it something fun." I had organized the evening down to the smallest detail, selecting a bustling downtown venue where we could disappear into the crowd. As we sipped our drinks and picked at small plates, I made sure to guide the conversation towards safe, impersonal topics. I was studying her closely, hoping for a misstep, but Emily was polished and composed, a natural at this kind of performance. At one point, her phone buzzed on the table. She immediately flipped it over, but not before I glimpsed the name that flashed on the screen. Marcus. I nodded subtly toward the device. "Work call?" I asked with casual interest. There was a fleeting shift in her eyes, quickly masked by a smile. "Yeah, just a quick check-in about next week's project," she responded. I returned the smile, playing along once more, pretending not to know better. "You push yourself too hard, you realize that?" I said. She laughed and leaned over, gently squeezing my hand. "You're too sweet. That's exactly why I married you." Her words hit me like a blow to the chest, but I managed to keep my face neutral. Later that night, once we were home, Emily claimed she was exhausted and went straight to bed. I stayed up, quietly scrolling through my phone. Earlier that day, I had installed a tracking app on her device, and now I examined the data it had gathered. Her recent locations lit up like a breadcrumb trail, her workplace, the gym, and once again, that boutique hotel linked to the credit card charges. The final ping came just before dinner, at Marcus's address. Sitting alone in the darkness, I stared at the glowing map. It wasn't a theory anymore. The evidence was undeniable. Still, I needed more to seal it. The trap was already in place. Now, I just had to wait for her to fall into it. Frank didn't make me wait long. 2 days later, I received a call at work. His voice was calm and measured, but what he told me turned my stomach. "It's worse than you imagined," he stated plainly. "I've gathered photos, timestamps, everything you could need. Your wife's been seeing this man regularly. Marcus, right? And they're not being discreet." My grip tightened on the phone until I thought it might break. "What do you mean by not discreet?" I asked. "They've been meeting at hotels, having private dinners, even spending time at his apartment," he continued. "I've got it all documented." The word hotels slammed into me like a wrecking ball. While Frank calmly explained the situation, my thoughts were in chaos. His voice remained cool and detached, while I felt like I was being ripped apart. "Should I send the files over?" he offered. "No," I rasped. "I'll come get them." That evening, I told Emily I had to stay late at work. She barely looked up from her phone, casually saying she might turn in early. By the time I reached Frank's office, the sun was sinking low, throwing long shadows across the pavement. He handed me a manila envelope, its weight oddly heavy in my hand. "Take your time with this," he said, his voice softer now. "It's a lot to take in." I nodded but didn't open it until I was alone in my car, parked a few blocks away. My hand shook as I slid out the contents. The photos confirmed everything. There was Emily, seated across from Marcus at an elegant restaurant, her hand gently resting on his wrist. Another captured them entering a hotel together, laughing with the carefree joy of teenagers sneaking off to bend the rules. The timestamps matched perfectly. Those were the nights she'd told me she was with Kara. But the worst image was saved for last, a photo taken through Marcus's apartment window. It showed Emily leaning in to kiss him, her hand on his chest, her expression glowing with a tenderness I hadn't seen from her in months. I stared at it until the image blurred. It wasn't just that she had betrayed me. It was how easily she had done it. She had looked me in the eye, lied without flinching, and then come home as though everything was fine. By the time I returned home, I knew exactly what I was going to do. There was a social gathering coming up, a friend's party that Emily had been excited about. Initially, I hadn't wanted to attend, but now it felt like the perfect opportunity. I spent the next day gathering everything I needed, determined to expose the truth. It was time to shatter the image she had so carefully built. On the evening of the party, Emily was in a great mood. She wore a sleek black dress that flattered her figure perfectly. Her makeup was impeccable, and laughter echoed through the house as she finished getting ready. "Don't you think I look great tonight?" she asked, twirling in front of me. You look perfect, I replied, keeping my voice calm and measured. She didn't notice the chill beneath my words. We arrived together, her arm tucked in mine, and soon slipped into the rhythm of greetings and light conversation. Emily flourished in this environment, winning over everyone effortlessly, while I stayed back, observing, waiting for the right moment. And then I saw him, Marcus. He stood by the bar, confidently chatting with a small group. His demeanor oozed arrogance. Emily noticed him too. For just a split second, her smile faltered. Then she turned back to me. I'm going to grab a drink, she said, already making her way toward the bar. Take your time, I told her as I watched her walk away. The moment she was out of sight, I quietly slipped from the crowd and made my way toward the event coordinator, a close acquaintance of the host, currently handling the music and visuals. I handed her a flash drive, leaning closer to explain my request in a hushed tone. You need to play this, I said firmly. Although she hesitated, curiosity got the better of her, and she eventually nodded in agreement. Roughly 10 minutes later, the lights began to dim, drawing everyone's attention to the front of the room where a large screen lit up. A strange sense of calm washed over me, like the stillness before a storm. This was the moment. The first image appeared, Emily and Marcus, seated too close together at a small cafe. Then another, this time, walking side by side, their hands intertwined on a quiet street. A quiet stir ran through the guests as the sequence continued, each photo more revealing than the last. The final image froze on the screen, Emily leaning in to kiss Marcus just outside his apartment. Silence took over the room. I didn't wait to see her expression or hear the gasps. I didn't need to. As people began to murmur and heads swiveled in her direction, I turned and walked out, leaving her to deal with the unraveling of the life she'd tried to hide. The moment the door opened, the brisk night air struck me, sharp and sudden, but I didn't slow down. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. This wasn't an end. It was the start of something new. My new beginning. And I wasn't about to let her betrayal shape who I was anymore. I was halfway down the street when I heard her shouting my name. Emily's voice pierced through the cold air, laced with both panic and rage. I kept moving, refusing to look back or even acknowledge her. Ethan, she cried again, louder now, her footsteps clicking rapidly as she rushed after me. She caught up just as I neared the corner, grabbing my arm with enough force to spin me around. Her cheeks were flushed, not from embarrassment, but from sheer anger. That mask of poise she always wore had shattered completely, and now, her raw fury was spilling out for the world to see. What in the world was that? She hissed, her nails pressing into my jacket sleeve. You just humiliated me in front of every single person there. Have you completely lost it? I yanked my arm away, the heat of my own anger surging to match hers. You're seriously asking me what's wrong? Are you kidding, Emily? You really thought I wouldn't find out what you've been doing behind my back. You've been lying to me for months. Her eyes widened for a heartbeat, then quickly narrowed. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Those pictures? They don't prove anything. Don't even try, I interrupted, my voice low but sharp. Don't you dare look me in the eye and lie again. I know everything, the hotel bookings, the dinners, the late-night meetings. I know it all. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For once, her endless supply of slick words failed her. You don't know how badly I wanted to believe you, I continued, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay strong. Even when the signs were glaringly obvious, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. But you didn't even bother hiding it. You thought I was too blind, too naive to notice. She folded her arms tightly across her chest, her expression hardening like stone. So, what now, Ethan? You think you're some sort of hero for putting this all on display in front of everyone? You think that somehow redeems you? Because you didn't just embarrass me. You made a fool of yourself, too. I don't care what they think, I shot back, my voice echoing in the quiet street. This wasn't about making a scene. It was about the two of us, or whatever was left of us before you tore it apart. Her face twisted into a cold smirk. Spare me the moral lecture. You've been boring for years, Ethan. Predictable. Safe. I needed more than that. Marcus made me feel something again, something you haven't in a long time. The words struck like a slap across the face, but instead of breaking me, they fueled something stronger inside. And what about the promises we made? The vows? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Were those just words to you? You don't get to rewrite history and pin your decisions on me. She rolled her eyes with a bitter laugh. Oh, please. You were never going to leave me. You don't have it in you. You're too scared to do anything real, which is why I'm not worried, not even a little. That was the moment everything shifted. I took a step back, shaking my head slowly. You're right, Emily. I was scared. I was weak, but not anymore. The smug look on her face faltered as I turned away, walking steadily into the night without a single glance back. The weight I'd carried for so long finally lifted. As I rounded the corner and her voice faded into the distance, something inside me clicked. For the first time, I could see the truth clearly. I hadn't lost anything that night. She had. The house was dead silent when I got home. The kind of silence that presses down on you, thick and suffocating. Emily hadn't followed me, which wasn't a surprise. She'd never been one to face consequences unless she was forced to. I stood in the entryway for a moment, staring at the space we'd built together. The walls around me were plastered with photographs, snapshots of vacations, family reunions, and cheerful celebrations. Each image was a polished falsehood, neatly framed. I felt an overwhelming urge to tear them all down, to scrub away every reminder of the life we had built together. But I held back, at least for now. Instead, I walked upstairs, pulled a duffel bag from the closet, and began packing. Folding shirts, stacking pants, the simple, repetitive motions gave me something to focus on. It felt like I was reclaiming a sliver of control. Each item I packed stirred up memories, some heartwarming, others painful. I thought about our honeymoon in Hawaii, the arguments we had over finances, and the quiet nights we used to spend curled up in bed watching movies. By the time the bag was full, my heart was tangled in a storm of emotions, rage, sorrow, and a peculiar sense of release that had been waiting to surface. As I zipped up the bag, the slam of the front door jolted me. Footsteps thudded up the stairs, loud and urgent. Then came Emily's voice, sharp and tense. I didn't answer. She appeared in the doorway, still dressed for the party, mascara streaked, her face flushed with emotion. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Without meeting her gaze, I slung the bag over my shoulder. "What does it look like?" "You're leaving," she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Seriously? Because of one fight? Don't be ridiculous. This is dramatic even for you." Her words barely registered. I moved to step past her. "Ethan," she snapped, her hand clutching my arm tightly. Her voice cracked under the weight of her anger and desperation. "Can you just stop and talk to me for a second?" I turned and finally looked her in the eyes, the first time since the party. "What exactly do you want to talk about, Emily? How you've been seeing someone else behind my back for months? Or how you smiled at me every day while lying through your teeth? Tell me, what part of that conversation sounds appealing to you?" She flinched, but quickly masked it with indignation. "You're acting like I did this on purpose. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. And maybe if you had been more present, more focused on me, I wouldn't have felt so invisible." Her nerve left me speechless. I stared at her, stunned that she could twist the blame so effortlessly. Finally, I spoke, my tone ice cold. "You've destroyed everything we built, and now you're trying to make me responsible for your choices? Do you even hear yourself?" Her posture shifted, arms folding across her chest like armor. For a split second, something flickered on her face. Regret, maybe. I made a mistake. But we've gotten through worse. We can come back from this. A humorless laugh escaped me. "No, Emily. You didn't just mess up once. You chose this path again and again. And the only thing I wish is that I had seen your true colors earlier." She shrank back a step, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield. "So what? You're just going to walk out?" "For the first time, yes," I replied, turning to head downstairs. "I am." As I reached the front door, her voice called out one last time. "Ethan, if you walk out now, you'll regret it." My hand paused on the doorknob. I looked back and said, "The only thing I regret is giving 6 years of my life to someone who didn't appreciate a single moment." The sound of the door closing behind me felt final, like peeling off an old bandage. I didn't know where I'd end up that night. Maybe a hotel or crashing at a friend's place. But for the first time in what felt like ages, I had the sense that I was finally moving forward. And I had no intention of turning back. That first night away from Emily was surreal. I found myself checking into a modest motel just outside of town, the same one where I had retreated after the confrontation at the party. The room was silent, almost too quiet, and I sat for hours on the edge of the bed, fixated on the faded, peeling wallpaper. The emotional weight was immense, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization of everything I had sacrificed in that relationship. I had twisted myself in knots trying to make her happy, trying to keep us together. And for what? To be misled, dismissed, and treated like I didn't matter. By midnight, the restlessness took over. I needed something, anything, to pull me out of that spiral. I picked up my phone and started scrolling through old messages. Eventually, I found a conversation thread with Greg, my best friend. He had always been there for me, though we hadn't talked much recently. Emily had a way of making sure I spent most of my time with her. "You up?" I typed, sending the message before I could change my mind. His reply came fast. "Yeah, man. Heard about the party. You all right?" I stared at the screen before typing back. "Not really. Can I come over?" Just 20 minutes later, I was on Greg's couch with a cold drink in hand, unloading everything that had happened. He sat quietly, letting me talk, his face shifting from disbelief to anger as I recounted the betrayal, the pictures, and how she twisted the story to paint herself as the victim. When I finally paused, he leaned back with a deep sigh. "Man, I always had a feeling something was off about her. But this? I didn't expect this." "I feel the same," I confessed, my gaze fixed on the bottle in front of me. "She completely fooled me, Greg. I can't help but feel like a fool." Greg's response was steady, almost forceful. "You're not a fool. She's just incredibly convincing. But look at it this way, you're free now. You don't have to deal with her nonsense anymore." That word, free, echoed in my head. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that way. It was unfamiliar, almost surreal. "So what now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Greg lifted his shoulders in a casual shrug. "Whatever you want, man. You owe her absolutely nothing. Go do something that makes you happy. Reconnect with people who actually care about you. Start a hobby. Take a trip. Just don't let her drag you back into her mess." His words struck something deep within me. I had spent so much time and energy revolving around Emily, calming her storms, fixing her problems, that I had lost sight of myself. I didn't even remember what it felt like to make decisions for my own sake. That night, I crashed on Greg's couch. And for the first time in many months, I didn't wake up feeling suffocated. The next day, I called into work and requested a few days off. Then, I grabbed a notepad and started a list. It began with simple tasks, deleting old emails and canceling subscriptions that Emily had insisted we keep. But as I added more, my determination strengthened. That afternoon, I called a law office. "I need to file for divorce," I stated, my tone unwavering. The woman on the other end didn't pry for reasons. She simply guided me through the initial process. It was surprisingly easy. When I ended the call, a strange relief settled over me. The legal steps would take time, but knowing the ball was rolling gave me a kind of control I hadn't felt in so long. The following days passed in a blur of practical chores. I moved my belongings out while Emily was at work, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "This is your mess now. Only reach out if it's about the divorce." I reset passwords on all shared accounts, canceled her credit access, and blocked her number completely. It wasn't just a physical break, it was a full detachment. Each action I took felt like peeling off a heavy layer. It was raw, painful, but absolutely necessary. By week's end, I had settled into a short-term rental. Nothing luxurious, but it was my own. I bought fresh sheets, a decent couch, and a new coffee machine that actually worked. It wasn't much, but it felt like the beginning of something real, mine. But Emily wasn't the type to let things go easily. Despite having blocked her and removing her access to everything, I knew deep down that silence wouldn't stop her. Control was her lifeline, and letting go wasn't something she could accept. That Sunday, while I was unpacking boxes in my small rental, trying to carve out a sense of normal, a sudden knock jolted me. It was loud, relentless, and entirely unwelcome. When I opened the door, there she was. Emily looked worn down. Her hair was messily tied back, makeup smeared as if she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, not with sadness, but a mix of fury, resentment, and perhaps desperation. "We need to talk, Ethan," she said, her tone sharp. I stayed silent, gripping the door tightly. "There's nothing left to say, Emily. I made that clear." She gave a short, bitter laugh and brushed past me before I could block her. "Really? You think you can just end 6 years of marriage without so much as a conversation? You think that's fair?" I shut the door behind her, my jaw clenching. "What I owed you was trust, respect, and faithfulness. I gave you all of that, and you threw it away." I don't owe you anything now. Emily spun to face me, her eyes blazing. You act like you were perfect. Like I'm the only one who made mistakes. But let's not pretend you were some flawless husband. You were distant, predictable, boring. You made me feel invisible. And Marcus? Don't. I cut in sharply, my voice slicing through the air. Don't say his name in this place. Not after everything. She paused, clearly stunned by my reaction. But true to form, she didn't back down. Fine, she said coldly, arms folded. Hate me if you want. But don't sit there pretending you were the perfect partner. Relationships are a two-way street. And you weren't exactly present either. I shook my head slowly, my laughter bitter. You really can't take responsibility for anything, can you? You cheated, Emily. You lied to me over and over. And now, instead of admitting that, you're blaming me for your betrayal. Her expression twisted as the mask she usually wore completely fell away. You don't get it, she muttered. Oh, I get it perfectly, I said, stepping in closer. You craved attention. You wanted thrills. And instead of talking to me, instead of giving our marriage a chance, you chose to tear it all down. That's on you, Emily. Not me. She opened her mouth, ready to respond, but the words never came. For once, she seemed truly unsure of what to say. I told her calmly, though my insides churned with emotion, that I had already filed the divorce papers. She could fight it if she wanted, but for me, this chapter was closed. We were over. Her eyes widened, as if my words had physically struck her. You're really doing this? She asked. I folded my arms and nodded, my tone firm. I told her that unless she had something meaningful to contribute, it was best she leave. She lingered for a second, her gaze fixed on me like she was trying to recognize a stranger. Maybe, in that moment, I was someone new to her. Then, without responding, she turned sharply and walked out, the sound of the door slamming echoing behind her. I remained there, motionless, staring at the closed door. The air around me felt unbearably thick. But beneath the emotional weight pressing on me, there was something unexpected, a quiet sense of relief. She was truly gone, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could finally breathe. The silence that followed Emily's departure was intense. The house seemed to pause, as though waiting for something to shatter the stillness. Yet, nothing came. I had braced myself for backlash, maybe a dramatic outburst or some manipulative move to pull me back in. But there was none of that. No surprise visits, no desperate texts or emails. It was as if a storm had passed and left behind a haunting calm. In the meantime, I began piecing my life back together. I threw myself into work, tackling all the tasks I had let slip during the decline of my marriage. My colleagues noticed the change. One of them, during a lunch break, smiled and said, "You're looking better, man. You seem lighter." I responded with a tight-lipped smile and said I was just doing some life cleaning. But the truth was far more tangled. Letting go of Emily did bring a sense of peace, but it didn't erase the sting of betrayal. In the quiet moments, my mind wandered back to the deception. I kept replaying her lies, the nights I waited for her return, and the images of her with Marcus that had shattered me. Then there were all the people, friends, acquaintances, even those from the party, offering unsolicited advice and opinions. One friend, over drinks, reassured me I had made the right call, saying she didn't deserve me. Another expressed disbelief at how composed I'd stayed, claiming he would have lost control in my shoes. I nodded, pretending their words gave me strength, but in truth, they didn't reach the place that still ached inside. Roughly a week after that last encounter with Emily, I received a call from Frank, the private investigator. He said he wanted to give me an update. Marcus was out of the picture. I sat up, curious. Frank explained that Marcus seemed to be skipping town, overwhelmed by trouble from other relationships catching up to him. Apparently, Emily hadn't been his only complication. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me thought it was fitting, Marcus's web of lies finally collapsing. But another part of me felt hollow. Emily had torn apart our life together for someone who didn't even have the decency to stay. After ending the call with Frank, I stared at my phone, tempted to tell Emily. Not to boast, but maybe to give her some kind of closure, or was it just a final jab? I couldn't be sure. But then I realized it wasn't my responsibility anymore. So, I opened my contacts and deleted her number. I still remembered it by heart, but doing it felt like a symbolic move, a small step forward. That night, sitting on my couch with a glass of whiskey in hand, I came to a quiet realization: I didn't miss her. What I longed for was the version of her I had believed in, the relationship I thought we had. But that person, That life was gone, if it had ever truly existed at all. The following day, I booked a trip. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a quiet cabin by the lake, a few hours from the city. I needed to escape, to get some distance from the memories tangled up in every familiar place. As I packed my things, a genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in ages. The pain was still present, a steady throb in the background, but alongside it was a glimmer of something else, hope. It was finally time to begin living for myself again. Driving out to the cabin felt like shedding a heavy layer I'd carried too long. As the miles passed, the city slipped away, replaced by open roads, gentle hills, and dense forest painted in the colors of fall. The air smelled clean out here, untouched by the smoke and noise of city life. Nestled deep in the woods, the cabin offered nothing but stillness. All I could hear was the rustle of leaves and the whisper of wind. It wasn't luxurious, but it had everything I needed: a bed, a fireplace, and a view of the lake that sparkled like glass under a pale sky. After dropping my bags, I walked to the edge of the dock and looked out at the calm water. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts settled. That first day passed gently. I unpacked, wandered the nearby trails, and later curled up beside the fire with a book I hadn't opened in years. The hurt of the past still lingered, but out here, it felt distant, like a shadow I could finally set aside. That night, lying alone in bed, my thoughts drifted back to the memories of my marriage, not the heartbreak or disappointments, but the cherished moments that had once made it all worthwhile. I remembered our very first date, when she had boldly ordered dessert before the meal, just to test if I could match her playful spontaneity. Another vivid memory surfaced, our impromptu road trip to Colorado, where we took a wrong turn and stumbled upon a tiny roadside diner that served the most unforgettable pie either of us had ever tasted. Reflecting on those joyful times stung, yet it also sparked a deeper realization. I had known happiness once, which meant I could find it again. The following morning, I rose with the sun and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. I sipped it slowly on the porch, watching as the first rays of daylight spilled across the lake. There was a profound stillness in that moment, a peaceful pause that made it feel like the world was holding its breath just for me. By the time the third day arrived, something inside me had started to shift. I felt a subtle lightness return as I spent hours trekking along forest trails. My legs ached from the steep climbs, but the panoramic views at the top made every step worthwhile. Each night, I opened a journal I'd spontaneously picked up at a small shop and began writing without restraint. I poured out every thought I'd kept hidden, messy, raw, and unfiltered. The pain of being deceived, the simmering anger, and the slow, painful acknowledgement that the version of Emily I had held onto no longer existed all flowed onto the pages. Yet within those lines, I also wrote about hope, about who I wanted to become, what kind of life I wanted to create, and the sense of freedom I was beginning to discover. On my last evening at the cabin, I sat by the edge of the lake, gazing at a sky dotted with countless stars. My thoughts turned toward the unknown path ahead. I still didn't have it all figured out, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't feel intimidating. I had made peace with leaving the past behind. When I departed the cabin the next morning, the heavy weight I had carried there was gone. What remained was a quiet determination, something small but powerful beginning to grow within me. The road home stretched out before me, and this time, it didn't feel like I was fleeing something. I was moving toward a future of my own choosing. Returning to the city brought a strange sense of familiarity and change all at once. The skyline remained the same, the streets unchanged, yet I was no longer the same person. My time in the cabin had stripped away the bitterness and sorrow, revealing something more honest and unguarded underneath. Though I wasn't fully healed, I had stopped feeling like I was drowning. Back at my rental apartment, the space felt different now. Sparse and simple, yes, but comforting in its own way. There were no ghosts from the past here, no painful memories echoing through the rooms, just me and a blank slate. Over the next few days, I focused on rebuilding, step by step. I picked up running again, hitting the pavement in the early hours while the city was still asleep. The rhythmic pounding of my feet was almost meditative, a steady reminder that I was progressing, even if only little by little. At work, I threw myself into every task. I was more focused than I had been in months, and the effort didn't go unnoticed. During a team meeting, my boss commented, "You've been really impressive lately. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." I responded with a modest smile. Work had become more than just a way to pass time. It was now a reliable anchor amid everything that had unraveled. Of course, not every moment was easy. The quiet of my new life sometimes felt more like an empty void than peaceful solitude. There were times when I caught myself about to reach for my phone, my finger hovering over Emily's name, before I reminded myself to stop. After our last conversation, she hadn't reached out again, and I felt relieved by the silence. One evening, while scrolling through my inbox, I noticed an invitation to a birthday celebration for an old friend. Normally, I would have passed, citing some excuse. But something about it made me pause. I realized how often I had isolated myself, pushing away the people who cared because I had been consumed by my own pain. Maybe it was time to change that. When the evening of the party arrived, I stood outside a lively bar, the air buzzing with chatter and music spilling into the street. I hesitated at the entrance, unsure if I was ready to step back into the flow of social life. Just then, a voice called out, "Ethan?" I turned, surprised to see a familiar face, Sarah, an old friend from college. She approached with a bright smile. "I thought that was you," she said warmly. "It's been ages. How have you been?" I offered a small shrug and a wry smile. "You know, just life unfolding." She chuckled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Doesn't it always? Come on, let's grab a drink." Inside, the bar was buzzing, but Sarah navigated the crowd effortlessly, leading me to a group of familiar faces. The conversations were easy, filled with nostalgia and lighthearted stories. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I laughed, and it wasn't forced. As the night deepened, Sarah leaned in closer, her tone soft and sincere. "It's really nice seeing you again, Ethan. You seem changed." In a good way. Her words caught me off guard, her honesty settling deep. "Thanks," I replied. "I'm doing my best." She raised her glass and smiled. "Here's to doing our best." I clinked my glass gently against hers and echoed, "To doing our best." That night, as I walked home beneath the crisp night sky, I came to a quiet realization. I wasn't just getting through the days anymore. I was finally beginning to live again. For the first time in what felt like ages, I found comfort in the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The weeks following the party carried a quiet transformation, hinting at a fresh chapter, though I couldn't clearly define its beginning. Life didn't suddenly become perfect or neatly organized, but it began to feel more balanced, more bearable. I made an effort to reconnect with people I hadn't spoken to in years, old friends, former coworkers, and even relatives I'd become distant from. The initial conversations were clumsy and hesitant, but gradually, the bonds I once believed were broken began to mend. One weekend, I visited my parents for the first time in months. When I walked in, my mom hugged me with an unusual tenderness. "You look good," she told me softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "You seem lighter." Her words lingered with me, resonating somewhere deep. Externally, nothing about my daily routine was remarkable. I'd get up, go to work, hit the gym, and wind down with a book or a TV show. But beneath those ordinary habits, there was a quiet undercurrent, a sense of hope, like a melody forming in the background, waiting to be learned. After the party, Sarah and I began exchanging messages. At first, it was light, humorous takes on work, book suggestions, movie tips. But gradually, our texts became more intimate. We shared memories from college, reflections on who we were back then and who we had become. During one evening in a cozy coffee shop, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think you'll be able to trust someone again?" Her question carried weight, yet it didn't feel threatening. "I'm not sure," I confessed. "I think I'll need time, but I'm open to it." Her smile in response was gentle and supportive. "That's a good beginning." Exactly 1 month later, the divorce was finalized. When I signed the papers, I didn't feel grief or remorse. Instead, there was a sense of liberation. Emily didn't contest anything, and the whole process turned out smoother than I'd expected. Afterward, she sent a brief message, thanking me for handling things with maturity. I chose not to reply. This time, it wasn't resentment that held me back, it was understanding. I no longer felt any obligation toward her, not to my time, my energy, or even my words. To mark this turning point, I did something completely unlike the old me. I impulsively booked a flight to Europe. It was a bold, unplanned decision, but it felt undeniably right. I had always dreamed of exploring Italy, strolling through Rome's historic avenues, sipping coffee on a Tuscan hillside terrace. When I told Sarah about the trip, her face lit up with a wide smile. "That's amazing. You've earned this," she said. "Thanks," I replied, letting her words settle in me like a gentle reassurance. The day before I departed, I stood quietly in my new apartment, taking in the blank walls. There were no framed photos, no reminders of my past life. And strangely, that emptiness brought peace. It symbolized a fresh beginning, a space entirely my own. As the plane lifted into the sky the next morning, I gazed out the window, watching the city recede beneath the clouds. The road ahead was undefined, full of questions, yet brimming with possibility. I didn't know exactly where the path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to discover it. And that, in itself, was enough.